building a computer is actually not that hard. And I'm going to show you how to put together a computer using this Dell right here. This is a Dell XPS 400. This Dell puts together the same way almost any other computer would. And once you start building computers, you start learning more, but this is just kind of a basic tutorial, basic ideas, basic things you need to know when plugging in your new system. If you actually build your own system, you can get like an awesome case and an epic processor and everything else and do it probably less than $300. And people would pay probably $2,000 for it from a store. So I highly recommend doing this, especially if you're low on cash. The tools you need are this thing right here. Yep, that's it. Here we have ATX computer case, which is actually a Dell XPS 400. No big deal. We have the main component of a computer right here, which is the motherboard. We have the processor, which is this tiny chip right here. We have the heatsink for the processor to continually cool the system. We have the power supply, which powers the system. A video card, just a standard video card. 2 DVD drives, a hard drive, RAM, and a dial-up modem. It's great stuff. Alright, first off, I want to apologize for the terrible vantage point. But here is the inside of the case, of which we are going to mount the motherboard. So once you have the motherboard, you have to get it into position. After that is done, you should mount the motherboard with the screws that came with it. After the motherboard is mounted, based on either if you got a stock heatsink or a aftermarket heatsink, you should mount the heatsink. Sometimes heatsink needs to be mounted before, but in my case it doesn't have to. So you should pop in the processor, and the way you do this is you have to open this little clamp, and on the processor you have to look for that little like gold triangle. When you see it, that goes to the side that's kind of like edged off on the socket. With the processor in the proper place, make sure you have it the right way. It should just kind of pop in there. You know, it doesn't really clamp or anything, but it should feel fairly solid in there. Once you've done so, you can pull this little clamp down on it, and that mounts it in place. It mounts fairly firmly, so you might have to use a slight bit of force to get it in there. At this point, my case requires this little bracket to be mounted beforehand for the heatsink. Yeah. No. Not yet. You don't think I do? You're an idiot. At this point, you have to mount this heatsink. Mine, all you have to do is slide it on these little clips, and it kind of places itself. and screws down. Most, however, have to be mounted using screws that just go over top of the processor, not Alright, with the processor and heatsink mounted and the motherboard mounted, you can now mount the power supply. Alright, the power supply is fairly easy. All you have to do is you slide this huge thing right into its position. And at this point, you mount it with screws on the outside of the case. But it mounts like that. After mounting the power supply, now what you have to do is you have to plug it in. There's about 4 connectors usually from the power supply that have to be connected to the motherboard. This little 20 pin, you have to find its matching little socket on the motherboard and plug it in. The next one is this little 4 pin. You find that one at the back left usually on a motherboard and plug that one in. The other 2 set of connectors are for SATA and IDE drives usually. These can be worried about later. However, down here, although this one's different than many, there's still these 2 little connectors. You cannot forget to connect these fan connectors, is what they are. You have to connect it somewhere to the motherboard because that's what keeps the processor cool. Alright. Once you've done that, then you can start mounting the drives. The hard drive usually has to be put in a bracket before you use it. However, mine's already in a bracket just to save time, so I'm just going to slide it into a slot. Don't worry, most of those just slide in using a bay, such as those right there. Alright, at this point, since you have your processor mounted, your power supply mounted, your hard drive in place, now you have to get your DVD drives, or whatever, in place. DVD drives, these slide in from the front usually into a little bay. They're very easy to install. Mine has 2 because I'm cool like that. But most of the time, you just have one. At the back of these things, normally you would plug in a SATA usually. Nowadays, DVD drives run more off SATA. This is a SATA power supply, and This here is a SATA cable. It's much more likely you'd use these than my IDE drive. Once you know what kind of connector you have, you just plug it in using the corresponding power supply. In my case, it's these. The next step would be to plug in the actual cable that reads it. In my case, this cable is an IDE cable, such as this. Really huge kind of thing. This at this point, the only thing you have left to do is to plug all the leads that you have into your motherboard and your hard drive. The hard drive SATA plug is really quick and easy to plug in. And just slides onto the back of it. The hard drive power supply is the SATA power supply. And don't forget to plug that in, because otherwise it won't work. After plugging those two things in, you can now install the video card. This plugs into this little black slot here, and they always have this little tab, and that's a PCIe Express 16 times. And that's what this will fit into. They're really easy to plug into place, and once you do, it makes life easy. This little dial-up modem card is a PCI slot, which is right there. After popping those both into place, the only thing left to do is to plug in RAM sticks. And due to the fact you can't see it well, nor is it just, it's just repetitive, I'm just going to show you how to install one. In the back of the video, below all these ribbon cables, are these little black slots. These are RAM slots. Mine has 4, sometimes you have 2, and so forth. All you do is you slide this thing into place. Make sure it's the correct way, because there's this little notch that has to line up. All you do is put a little bit of pressure on it, and the clips will snap it into place. Make sure to plug in all your connectors. Double check everything. Make sure your fans are plugged in, and make sure the power supply leads, the 20-pin power supply and the 4-pin are plugged in. Double check your connections in the DVD drive. Once you've done that, plop back on your massive, I'm sure, case cover. And voila, your computer.